This morning I'm going to talk about psychic energy, Agni Yoga and psychic energy. If you're a student of Agni Yoga, if you have read the many books on Agni Yoga and tried to practice psychic energy, you're going to find this to be a very valuable talk. It's going to really tell us what psychic energy is in a most practical way. You're going to learn how to develop more psychic energy. You're going to learn about the value of psychic energy. You're going to learn without psychic energy, there's basically no life. Here's a wonderful phrase helping us to take this first step into understanding what psychic energy is. Psychic energy is like the sap of a tree, which animates and sustains and nourishes every branch of human unity. So right from the get-go, think about your own self as being a tree. Or think of your solar angel as a tree. Or think of the master. Or think of something even greater than that. Think of the ashram. Not greater than the master, because the master is part of the ashram, excuse me. But you want to think of the master and the ashram. You want to think about hierarchy. All these aspects of life that are greater than our little physical self. Now imagine that from these greater spheres of life or greater consciousnesses of life comes forth this sap, like the sap of a tree. And this energy animates and it sustains and it nourishes you, it nourishes the group, it nourishes all life. We could say then, we could deduct that the more animated you are, the more animated a group is, the more cohesive, the more synthesized a family, a group, a nation is, then the more receptive and sensitive they are to that outflowing sap of energy called psychic energy. That they are receiving abundant supply of psychic energy. Now, psychic energy is not something you can pretend that you have. You either have it or you don't. You're either using it for the right reasons or the wrong reasons. When psychic energy disappears, isn't this interesting to think about the fact that psychic energy can actually disappear? When it disappears from friends and family members and group members, even when psychic energy disappears from the whole group, do you know what happens? Absolutely, it's exactly the right word. Disintegration in relationships sets in. And this results oftentimes with a long, painful process, both for the individual and collectively. I can think of many examples, but it's better for you to think about these examples yourself by what you've observed, what you've recognized. You know, maybe your family has fallen apart. Maybe you know of a group that has disintegrated. And in that disintegration, you have talked to people, individuals, who have been deeply hurt by that disintegration. And how the disintegration affected the whole of those that were part of that group, or the whole of those that were part of that family. And that hurt continues on for perpetuity. Is that a word? Perpetuity? Okay, good. So psychic energy creates relationship. It creates kinship. It creates a unity, and it creates synthesis. So psychic energy is definitely something that we all want to have. Now this next phrase it's so important. This next idea is so important to think about. Sometimes it is only a few people who act as the dynamos of a group. What do? They provide the needed amount of psychic energy for its present and future activities. So you find this in every group. There's usually just a handful of people who are always there. They're dynamic people. They carry more energy than we do as an individual. They're the ones that step up to the plate. They're the ones that say, I can do this. They're the ones that say, I don't know how to do it, but I'm going to learn how to do it, and then I'll do it. Right? We even see this in the family. It may not even be mom and dad. It may be one of the children. Usually one of those children would be the parent that references, this child teaches me so much. This child is like an adult. Even though that child might be 7 years old or 12 or 13 years old, they're pure. They're pure. And this is why psychic energy comes into them. Remember the term I use, sensitivity and receptivity. That the more receptive, the more sensitive we are, then the greater that sap of energy is going to come into and flow into our whole being. That psychic energy, if it is flowing from Shambhala, if it is coming through hierarchy, if it is coming through the ashram and the master, and we are individually or collectively so sensitive to that psychic energy, then what happens? We have to radiate it out and give it out. It's almost this, we could call it a divine urge to give. That divine urge would be also known as service, right? Right. This is a kind of service that is not a burden. It's not perfunctory. It is not mechanical. It's like, I've observed that some people will be out there to do this and to do that, and they'll raise their hand, but there's no joy in what they contribute. It's like, this is what I mean by perfunctory. They're doing it because they think this is a thing to do, but see, it's not the result of psychic energy. You'll find those who engage in service that are impulsed by psychic energy bring joy into everything that they do as they engage in service. There is just a joy there. We would also call it enthusiasm. You know, enthusiasm is not something that's conjured up. Enthusiasm is electrical, and it comes from the Buddhic plane of consciousness. That is true enthusiasm. There are also groups that, as long as they are directed to service, receive their energy supplies from invisible sources. Even if for certain reasons individual members weaken their own psychic energy. This is a great seed thought to really think about. I know we're having some problems electronically, but just stay concentrated. We've got the guys back there, they'll figure it out. So let's think about this. There are also groups that, as long as they are directed to service, receive their energy supplies from invisible sources, even if for certain reasons these members have weakened their own psychic energy. For example, you can see movements that were created ages ago still continuing despite the departure of those who acted as dynamos. Isn't this interesting to think about? Haven't you wondered, how can this organization sustain itself when the founder is gone, the leaders, those dynamic leaders, are no longer there? It's that invisible source supplying that group energy for its future activities. This psychic energy given to invisible sources is given only to bridge past successes with future successes until new people who are charged with psychic energy can come at a critical time and begin to charge and support the activities of the group. For example, without stepping on toes, you can think about the Rosicrucian Fellowship. This is one of such group. The Theosophical Society is another. The Masons would be another. Or other spiritually oriented open or secret movements, plus some major religious movements, which prove the truth of that statement. On the other hand, certain other groups continue to exist. Now, this is where it gets a little complex, not because of psychic energy, but because of massive rejection or reaction existing against them. See, this is an energy that stimulates the lower nature, causes a huge reaction, and they feed off of that negativity. It's like people that feed off of the energy of dark forces. It is like people that feed off of anger. Or it is like groups, individuals and groups that are so hugely vain, so hugely egotistical, that they feed off of that egotism, off of that vanity. They feed off of the anger, and that sustains them for a while. The moment they start to be destructive to the family, destructive to the group, destructive to the nation, the environment takes an action to disintegrate them. We could say, perhaps in a less dramatic way, that they begin to pull that individual out of the family, out of the group, out of the nation. Thus, they hasten their own destruction. It may take a few days, it may take a few decades, until the outer supply of this energy totally disturbs the person's logic and reasoning. It can also disturb the logic and reasoning of the whole of the group or of the whole of the nation. Do you see how that works? Okay. Success and progress are based on psychic energy. Increasing psychic energy and using it for the service of humanity is the only way to reach happiness and prosperity. So if you find yourself not filled with happiness, not filled with joy, now you know what the remedy is. It is to increase your psychic energy. If you find yourself being driven by your ego, driven by your vanity, and you have the courage to face this, and you look at yourself and say, I'm not real. I'm an artificial human being. I want to be real. I want to regenerate that lower nature to become the true self. We're going to increase psychic energy. Laziness weakens psychic energy and even wipes it out totally. Some people like to rest, and for them rest is an inaction or laziness, inertia, and apathy. Real rest accumulates psychic energy. Real rest accumulates psychic energy. So this is how you can begin to accumulate psychic energy, by real rest. What is real rest, you ask? If it's not laying on the couch, if it is not staying in bed until noon, then what is a real rest? Real rest means action carried out on a different plane and in a different form. For example, the greatest rest of the body is experienced when one is in deep meditation or deep thought. When one is occupied with planning, let's say, a movement to solve the problems of humanity. Now, most of us don't really think at that level yet, but disciples do and initiates do. And in this kind of thought, they are charged with this flow of psychic energy and create a new movement. Imagine back in the 1920s when the Agni yoga movement was established. Where did that idea come from? It came from a great master. How did that energy reach the two people that initiated that movement? Because they were sensitive and they were receptive. When one is dedicated to a great service, the heart is in the state of the greatest rest. When one is dedicated to a great service, the heart is in a state of greatest rest. When one is occupied with planning a movement to solve problems of humanity, the brain is at rest. See, if you've never experienced this inflow of psychic energy and you've always depended upon your own self-determination and bullying your way through life, you won't understand this. How can the brain be at rest? How can the heart be at rest and still creating movements and resolving problems for humanity? The idea of rest is not inaction, but is a period in which the body is in the process of filling or charging itself with psychic energy. The dweller in the bodies does not need rest. The dweller in the body does not need rest. Only his mechanism does. To rest his mechanism, the dweller in the body switches his attention from one to another body and thus provide rest for them. When people mistranslate the concept of rest, they retire. And when they retire, they get very sick. And they spend the majority of their days visiting doctors, trying to afford drugs, prescription drugs. But that's not rest. That's the process of disintegration. Master M in the book Brotherhood tells us, thus rest is nothing but equilibrium. But equilibrium is, listen to this, this is a little wordy, but equilibrium is a proportionate tension of energy. Now, physics says that equilibrium is a dynamic state in which all forces or processes are in balance. And then it goes on to say, with no resultant change, so they're wrong. See, they got the first half of it right, but the last half of it is wrong. Now, I know that's a pretty bold statement for a non-physicist to say, but we are all physicists if we are Agni yogis. So the master is saying equilibrium is a proportionate tension of energy. That tension of energy comes from psychic energy, and then we engage in higher thought. We're building bridges to the higher worlds, to the subtle planes. And what's so beautiful for us is that, and I'm going to talk about a little bit about this during our anniversary weekend, that there are certain locations in the subtle plane, literal locations in the subtle plane, that if your consciousness can be drawn to these spheres, these actual locations in the subtle plane, it is here where you can put yourself in a state of equilibrium. Remember, equilibrium is a proportionate tension of energy. And if you are ill, you will be healed. If you are depressed, you will be filled with joy. If you feel drained of a sense of future, that sense of future will be given to you. Hey, this is why we don't want to depend on this physical body or this earthly existence to sustain us on this journey. So psychic energy is like that sap in a tree that nourishes all the branches. So for us, the tree represents something other than the oak tree out in the yard. That tree can be Shambhala, it can be hierarchy, it can be the teacher, it can be the ashram. When we are around the teacher, aren't we energized and wonder, we feel this energy because we're so happy to be around the teacher. What is happening is the teacher is nourishing us with psychic energy. The more our consciousness engages itself with deeper activities, the more our vehicles cooperate with it. Do you get that? I don't hear any. Yes, okay. The more our consciousness engages itself with deeper activities, the more our vehicles cooperate with it. What is a deeper activity? Well, the first thing that comes to mind is a vision. The teacher, the leader, the founder of a group gives us a vision, right? If that vision was given to that founder, that leader, that teacher from one of those locations in the subtle planes, which we could say, is an abode of light, then all we need to do is to align our consciousness to the vision of that was given to that leader. And we learn how to cooperate with it. It is a very, very different way to think. When I remember when I was but a child and I was looking for, the purpose of life, for the mysteries of life. And then I moved into that first spiritual group. And I kept waiting for the answer, waiting for the answer. I know this teacher knows the mysteries. Give me just a little bit of that mystery. And she couldn't do it. But now we have these mysteries all around us and available to us. Study Agni Yoga. Come to these lectures. Meditate. Participate in the full moon meditations. If you want to understand these mysteries, if you want to understand more about psychic energy, this is how you do it. Don't stay home and watch TV or say, I've had one hell of a day. I can't go to another function. I have to stay home and relax and watch Revenge on television. I don't. Believe me, that's not the way. It's not the way. Fatigue occurs when there is no synchronization and cooperation between the consciousness and the vehicles, or even between the vehicles themselves. Psychic energy aims for equilibrium in man, in families, in groups, and in humanity as a whole. Science will soon discover and prove that equilibrium is the cause of existence. So the purpose of rest is to acquire energy. But strength is dissipated through a lack of equilibrium. We are told that to acquire psychic energy, we must develop receptivity and sensitivity, as I was saying at the beginning of the talk. Receptivity and sensitivity must continuously be developed. Sensitivity is not an emotion. Sensitivity is not being touchy. Sensitivity means more of your senses are unfolding and being developed. Those senses on the astral plane, the senses on the mental plane, the senses on the intuitional plane. Receptivity and sensitivity must continuously be developed to such a degree that no opportunity is lost in sensing and receiving psychic energy. I'm going to repeat this. I know this is a little tough, but isn't this what we want? Don't we want to be challenged? Or do you just want to come every Sunday and hear the same thing that you're so used to hearing? Receptivity and sensitivity must continuously be developed to such a degree that no opportunity is lost in sensing and receiving psychic energy. Receptivity and sensitivity can be developed with constant alertness, constant observation, constant watchfulness, and attention. But psychic energy can only be absorbed by humans when they feel it and recognize it and accept it. In the future, investigators of psychic energy will properly expand these ideas. and teach about receptivity, and teach about sensitivity, and teach about readiness, and teach about acceptance. The current, this is very important. Of course, the whole talk is important. I know. But this is especially important. The current of psychic energy does not force itself, but waits for proper reception. The current of psychic energy does not force itself, but waits for proper reception. So psychic energy can be accumulated, but it's not going to be imposed upon us until we're receptive to it and we can feel it, okay, and accept it. Primary energy is another name for psychic energy. I'm jumping through some ideas here. I think you're getting overwhelmed. Psychic energy reveals two very important factors. The first is motive/intention, and the second is action. Motive/intention and action. Psychic energy sheds light to make us see the difference that exists between these two. There are actions which are, for example, decorated with cosmetics, and they have no living spirit in them. See, it's like I was saying earlier that somebody raises their hand and says, sure, I can do that, and they go out and mechanically engage in doing that, but there's no joy. They're saying, this is what I'm duty bound to do. See, there's no spirit in it. There's no life in it. There are motives or intentions, the expression of which has been, this is really important when you think about what's going on in the political world in this country. There are motives or intentions, the expression of which has been temporarily misjudged and condemned, such as what our present president has undergone. But they have solid spirit in them. This is why he has not given up. Psychic energy enables us to see the motives and intentions behind all labor offered to us. If the motives and intentions are not based on higher principle, they turn into traps and a source of trouble for us and for others. Because of exposure to psychic energy, leaders choose the path of right motives. This is a true leader, even if they are not expressing it properly. They understand that a great demonstration of labor will soon fall apart if it does not rest upon the pillars of right motives. See that? When psychic energy penetrates into or descends upon a human being, it slowly eliminates habits. Habits are not only physical but also emotional and mental. They are like molds which constantly pattern etheric, astral, and mental energies into the same format. So when Helena Rourke said just find 5 habits in this lifetime or 3 habits and try to destroy it in this lifetime, there's an incredible mystery behind that statement. And the answer to that mystery is right here. Habits are like molds which constantly pattern etheric, astral, and mental energies. So the older you get, the more deeply entrenched into habits you are, habitual thinking, habitual emotions, habitual actions. And why is that, you ask? Because of the brain. The physical brain and the etheric brain. This is the molding process, the patterning process. So we have this pattern that is molding itself from the time we were wee ones, little babies. And we don't want to let go of those patterns, and yet we suffer from them. Oh, I'm so out of time. Well, I'm going to stop right there and leave you wondering. Were there any questions on the webcast? Okay, Patty.
When you were saying mold, does that mean like
think of a Jell-O mold. You make the Jell-O, you put the water and the stuff in it and everything, and then you put it in a mold, right? And then that mold has to set. Okay, and now it's a pattern. Okay, any other questions? Okay, that's it.